welcome to the next iteration of Fifth Nine Podcast. My name's Philip Harrison, and today we'll be interviewing Yakin Prabdiel, the Managing Director of Fifth Nine, and also Kasem Frank, the co-founder of Aion and the CEO of Mavennet. Okay, a bit of background then on the topic. So what's been going on in blockchain and around digital interoperability? So July, there's quite a few news items. So HTC announced it was going to launch the HTC Exodus, which is the world's first blockchain phone in 2018, so later on this year. Each HTC Exodus or device will be a node which allows the users to own their identity and their data. Also, GXS announced the Block City D app in China has 1.8 million users. Block City incentivizes its users to cultivate the marketable data and monetize the GXS tokens. Also in July, Stratis announced new blockchain-powered digital identity D apps for mobiles. So there's a bit of a theme here around digital identity. Closer to home for those in the UK, IBM and FX giant LCS launched the Blockchain App Store for banks. Its aim is to make it easier for banks to access blockchain technology. So quite a few things there moving in the banking sector as well in July. And lastly, in July, Google Cloud announced the blockchain partnership with Digital Asset to build blockchain dApps on the Google Cloud. Let's start with Kesem, with yourself on Aion. For our listeners who don't know, do you want to tell us initially just a bit about Aion, what it is, and your latest progress in the recent months?
Thank you so much for having me on. My name is Kesem Frank. I'm one of the co-founders of the Aion project. Aion was essentially conceived out of the realization that we were pretty much working on the premise of how do you take, this super high potential technology, but still low maturity in terms of how much, fermenting it has gone in terms of blockchain technology, and really trying to introduce it to kind of mainstream enterprise. And the vision is straightforward. We kind of see this world where blockchains are driving in fulfilling a much more significant role in pretty much powering all the mainstream functionalities and services that we all kind of, come to expect out of the modern world. Now, here's the thing. It is incredibly hard to try to implement blockchains before there are, concrete standards that have emerged. A lot of people are doing a lot of different things, a lot of different hypotheses as to, how to achieve consensus and which decentralized databases are the best ones to use. The point I'm making, however, is you have to think about it from the perspective of a mature enterprise. For them, the switching cost inherent to, making the wrong bet are prohibitive. They need to see much more adoption before they themselves become adopters. And obviously, it's a chicken and an egg, meaning if nobody moves first, nobody moves at all. When you come to think about how you could solve, which tools do we have to actually apply to try to essentially deconstruct this problem, you pretty quickly come to the topic of interoperability. Here's the argument. If you were able to achieve a decentralized rail between different stacks of architecture, so two blockchains that weren't ever supposed to talk between the other, you could actually future-proof towards whatever it is, whatever direction that the industry would end up moving in. And this is huge. So essentially, we want to create blockchains as a main growth driver for enterprise.
You know what? This is so close to our heart, man. Exactly what you're saying is exactly what our enterprise customers are screaming out for you. This concept of being able to be black boxed in disruptive tech where they have no clear vision of how this would talk to the rest of the world in the next 20 years scares them. And it should scare them because without a sustainable and interoperable plan, it is very difficult to make a move forward. So I think what you're saying resonates very strongly with us.
Fantastic. And to your point, Yakin, I think that's exactly what mature enterprises are expecting. So again, this is not, a hypothetical exercise for the future. This is a capability that if you cannot demonstrate, you're simply not going to be relevant. So back to the original question, we contemplated the Aion standard is a decentralized rail between different blockchains. And here's the straightforward kind of way to think about it. We created blockchains because we really wanted to do away with intermediaries. We didn't want to recreate, a banking system for the blockchain. But look at where we are. If anyone of the listeners owns a crypto asset, a Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ether, whatever it might be, and wants to exchange it to another fully decentralized digital crypto asset, we are literally forcing our users to go through centrality. So the model is you take your Bitcoin, so you're on chain, and you go through an OTC partner or maybe a exchange, so you're going off chain, and then you have to go on chain again. Unless we figure out a way that could actually give you a cohesive fabric that keeps you on chain, we're doing it wrong. And that is exactly what Aion was created to solve for.
Okay. But what you mentioned there is a lot about blockchain to blockchain interoperability. What about linking in with the existing ecosystem? So linking in with cloud systems or to, let's say, mobile ecosystem and having it as a part of a wider multi-platform based solution. Could it interact with that, or can it only be interoperability between blockchain to blockchain?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's the short answer is yes. Integration is absolutely one of the biggest challenges, but also opportunities for our industry. The thing or maybe the way to think about it is you can only trust a database, assuming you do not own the underlying data, if it is decentralized. That is the only way that you could actually trust that no one is forging the data, modifying it. There is an actual validation process around acceptance criteria. You really want to essentially migrate. Of course, when the use case is applicable, you really want to migrate what we come to think and realize are traditional databases siloed to decentralized. To do that in a trusted manner would mean a much, I would say, more profound layer of integration. You probably even want to take it down to the data feed itself level. And then you could treat all of these, silo databases essentially as oracles onto a blockchain that you could actually have a degree of certainty where data validity is absolutely important.
It's very interesting you say that about oracles because in the bridge between the old world and the new world, we are finding more and more requests for a statement of interoperability between what should be legacy SOA or microservices based technologies, where our propositions have been warmly received in the form of software oracles or, in certain cases, hardware oracles. So the concept of using that oracle as a definitive point of trust seems to be becoming more and more the bridge of culture that allows us to jump across before we tear down the old world and build a new one.
But keeping on that line, obviously, to tear down the old world isn't going to happen anytime soon. The sooner one would argue is that we link new blockchain solutions to existing infrastructure. So let me give you an example. Let's say there's a blockchain solution out there, which is, for example, BlockPass, which allows you to store your individual identity on the blockchain. Well, it doesn't store it, but it validates it, so it's completely valid. But let's say then I want to open a bank account, which is all the banking systems or non-blockchain solutions. I want to be able to open a bank account, not provide all my passport details to the bank, but use my BlockPass blockchain ID. Now that has to have some kind of interoperability between the blockchain solution and the infrastructure of the bank there. Is that where Aion could help fit through, or how does that kind of interoperability work?
Essentially, what you're describing, the kind of instance that you're describing, is where we want to take very traditional processes, right? KYC in this example, and actually create a decentralized model to power them. I think that it's actually going to shift the paradigm. So today, when you think of how traditional KYC is done, it is very much siloed and varies depending on the kind of verification that you need to go with the institution. It's very different to go through KYC with a bank versus, I don't know, your utility provider kind of a thing. But they both are looking for the same kind of attributes. I think that the biggest innovation coming from that, and you kind of hinted to that with really drawing the focus to all the digital identity based projects that are out there, is by creating essentially in user autonomy on top of a blockchain. Autonomy in the sense that you are not giving away identity credentials or attributes to a third party. You actually own them for your own identity. And the only thing any of these institutions care about is there enough validation that those attributes that you own are valid or not. So I think that KYC of the future looks very different than what it is today. There will be no more submission of, I don't know, you holding your passport or any government, issued IDs to third parties. And then it essentially becomes a black box. You have no clue what they do with those documents and how they store them. Those docs end up storing on a smart contract that is essentially a proxy to your identity on the blockchain. Those institutions then will need to write requests to that blockchain that holds your identity to verify it. That's how I think about the next iteration of this process.
Okay, and so just going back to Aion's role in this world, and maybe it's not just particularly around digital identity. Let's talk about the cloud infrastructure. So, for example, Microsoft Azure is going down the Hyperledger route. Amazon's going the R3 route. What's Aion's view of? Are you guys looking to work with cloud providers? Are you keeping separate? Where are you going into that interoperability with standard infrastructure solutions play?
Right. So I think it's important to differentiate between integration and interoperability. Integration is essentially the way that we are, making a blockchain stack concrete, insignificant, meaningful, I guess is a better word, within, an existing production environment. My points around you need to be able to do integration right is all about preventing the phenomena of garbage in, garbage out. You need to actually be able to provide a very high degree of confidence that data that you're onboarding on top of a chain is valid. That by itself does not constitute interoperability in the way that I think about it. That is just integration, and that's a challenge by itself. When I say interoperability, I really mean once you have onboarded a piece of data on top of a blockchain, right? It could be permissioned, it could be private, it could be public, it could be a hybrid. What you really need to do is be able to move either the entire data set, or maybe it's a minimal data set, it's a subset of it, in a way that's secured in a blockchain sense. Secured in a blockchain sense means that every layer of data moving between two networks needs to be decentralized. There needs to be a consensus that applies to every step of the process. So for me, interoperability and what Aion is doing about it is much more about how do you bridge all these decentralized rails. So you just mentioned R3, right? R3 has a product called Corda. It's a DLT, and there's a notary model inherent to it. You need to be a validated actor within a federation to even participate. But what if you have two of these federations? What if you wanted to bridge two R3, Corda-based blockchains? So the most straightforward approach would be, well, just open them up so the same validators sit on both networks. That is maybe a straightforward kind of architecture or an engineering approach, but there are definitely real world reasons why that usually cannot be the case. So there is a very good reason why we have separate networks between businesses. And even within the context of a single business, there are very good reasons why we have, we impose firewalls between different business lines, right? There is a very good reason why it's not the same network that runs your, credit application with your bank's insurance business, because you never want your credit score to bias bank's decision of do they underwrite a policy covering you. The point I'm making, I guess, is the following. The interoperability layer is about how you could actually move in a decentralized manner pieces of data across two decentralized blockchains. To your point about mobile integration, cloud integration, I guess the business rationale that we operate on is that a lot of those businesses will migrate, will actually adopt decentralized rails is part of the under the hood kind of architecture that they employ today. And then the problem for them would be, what's next? How do we actually make this data meaningful outside of the context of a single business or a single consortium?
That is such a powerful statement. But what surprises me is Aeon's gone mainnet, right? Yet a lot of the other big interoperability players, Cosmos being one of them and some of the others, they still are on testnet. So what has helped Aeon become so speedy in being able to create the bridges? Because if you look between the architecture, whilst they follow different mantras in the code base, they are all trying to solve the same problem. And from a business grade perspective, I'm looking for an answer. So how has Aeon gotten there faster?
Yeah, that's a great question, and again, I have tremendous respect. So for an instance, you talked about Cosmos. I have tremendous respect to that team. I think that without stating the obvious of really doubling down on excellence of execution and really having a really transparent and I guess common sense kind of roadmap that you adhere to and execute against, it comes down to kind of the approach to the solution. So to your point, Yakin, yes, everybody wants to solve this hard nut to crack. There are various different approaches as to how you do that. You could do that by essentially imposing infrastructure level changes on top of existing frameworks. So you could say, if I wanted to create a bridge between Ethereum and Bitcoin, then that necessitates that there will be some changes to how Ethereum and Bitcoin achieve consensus or the database layer they both employ. That would be one way to do it. That is, however, not the way that we do it. The way we do it is by essentially going and aiming very purposefully for a low common denominator, I guess, between architectures. You essentially compromise on the feature set and the completeness of what interoperability in all its glory actually looks like. So if you want to get to an ideal state that crypto assets can move bidirectionally, essentially as soon as the world state of any blockchain changes and there is a free flow of logic. So a smart contract sitting on, the Aion network could actually get both triggers for action by blockchain A and trigger events as a result of it on blockchain B. If that's the ideal state scenario, you're going to have to make a lot of compromises by not necessitating infrastructure level changes on existing networks. You're going to be able to do only a subset of those features on existing networks. But then you're betting on is that every modern blockchain, literally every modern blockchain, would be able to be compatible with the full feature set. And I think that's kind of how we're seeing, or where we're seeing, I guess, rather the market moving to.
So that makes a lot of sense. I guess from your speed and agility on minimal viable product, it seems that you've kind of shortlisted the things that make the most amount of value and the biggest amount of impact to get to mainnet. Because I noticed that your approach is very different from what I consider to be the exchange view. So if we were to draw up a stack of interoperability, you could interoperate at the edge, you could interoperate at the infra layer or the blockchain layer, and of course you can interoperate at the exchange layer. And I think what you've said makes a lot of sense, where today a lot of people assume that if you can exchange Ethereum for Bitcoin or Bitcoin for Aion, then at the exchange layer is the only layer that is currently available, whilst technologies such as Aion and bridges are very much a real alternative.
Absolutely.
And the one thing I wanted to ask, because it's of great interest with the digital interoperability theme, that one of the instruments of digital that we are very much behind is the concept of machine learning and the greater statement of AI. I read that Aeon's fundamentally based their interoperability with one of the big instruments of change being AI. Can you help us understand that?
I'm happy you're drawing attention to that. That's absolutely one of my favorite kind of aspects of what we're building in. There are two things that we think on the intersection of the blockchain domain and the AI domain just makes, they make absolute sense. First, when you look at the big proof of work networks of today, right? And obviously Bitcoin is by far the largest, Ethereum is second. When you kind of measure, when you quantify the amount of waste that we create just to achieve a consensus measured by the amount of, voltage that you need to commit, measured by the amount of computing, storage, whatever you want to call it, it is an extremely, extremely wasteful process. Now, here's an hypothesis, right? What if you could actually harness all these crazy amount of computation in a way that preserves the algorithm? So you're still going to have a fundamental winner takes all kind of logic at the end of it. Somebody solves the puzzle and everybody and gets the bounty, everybody else loses. But what if you could actually harness everyone's computation so there is an actual byproduct that is beneficial, so it doesn't just go down to waste? And when you come to think about how you want to train an AI, you very quickly realize that this would be a fantastic application for all the excess power of proof of work networks. So again, every time we go through a consensus cycle, sure, there's still going to be a winner takes all in terms of the bounty that the network will generate, but all of the computation power will be harnessed towards something that's of a common benefit, like training an AI engine. So that's one thing that is in active research here in Aion, and that's absolutely fascinating. The second thing, I guess, speaks to more profoundly what is it that really scare people about AIs, right? Like you could take it to, I guess, the more futuristic of an AI going rogue, or you could take it to the most immediate, meaning you go through any of the open APIs for AI, right? You could ask Google, what is the best pizza in Chicago? And there really isn't a good way for you to validate whether the answer you got is the true, answer that, whatever, Bob's Pizza is the best, or somebody skewed the models or the data to try to push you there. You don't know if somebody paid money for you to actually see that result. And when you think about how can you fortify the rails that an AI sits on top of, so you could have certainty that no one is modifying those models, then blockchain makes just an ideal contender to what an AI rail looks like. In other words, how do you keep an AI honest? You fortify its rails on a blockchain that it cannot change because they're immutable. So those are two of the biggest aspects that are in very active research, I'd say, right now with Aion, and we're absolutely excited about both.
Okay, I think we need to do a podcast on blockchain and AI, but that's for another time. Let's come back to, if you will, the mobile aspect of interoperability. Obviously, the HTC news is massive, and potentially with IPFS as well. If we think to the future, you could have a situation where you've got 3 billion population or so with their mobile phones, all of them as nodes, all of them storing the data through IPFS, and therefore potentially governments and such like can't ban certain content because it's not centralized and it's all decentralized. So I think the power for this one is large. So I wanted to talk about the interoperability from a mobile perspective, and Yakin, I want to get your thoughts on this one.
Mobile-orientated interoperability is a growing movement where we're seeing that mobile phones at the edge, at the user experience, are beginning to create a new level of interoperability, very different from the infrastructure and API levels that we've heard Kesem speak about at the Aion capability sets. What we're seeing is that with 3 billion edge devices, these mobile phones effectively are fulfilling a customer experienced interoperability use case sets that cannot be distinguished from today's ability to transfer data from one application or platform through another through your mobile phone. And by including the power of distributed databases like IPFS, what we're seeing is that this mobile oriented interoperability movement is using the mobile DApp framework to allow applications to share data intrinsically without the infrastructure layer being integrated. On the subject of digital identity, it is a super important component to the Fifth Nine's Digital Plus suite of products in digital transformation. And the objective here is to create a distributed, immutable digital ID based on a mobile login service where you can use biometrics from a mobile phone to unlock services that are currently requesting for 2 or 3 factor authentication. It means that you don't have to remember passwords anymore. It supersedes componentries that are built into things like GSMA, which are mobile connect. The ability to communicate, plus your ability to manage privacy, plus your need for richer services equals digital plus. So communicate plus blockchain plus digital transformation plus enriched customer experiences is what makes digital.
And just from your thoughts, I mean, people listening to this, well, their immediate reaction would be, okay, would they be able to talk to each other? So if I have a HTC blockchain phone, can it work or engage with people on an Android phone, or are they going to be completely siloed? Or do we simply not know yet how it's going to work?
I would say that if you look at the model that people are presenting today, it's all in a silo. I mean, my thoughts are that this world will have to merge. And just as Aion are making massive steps in moving forward that interoperability wedge at the infrastructure and network layer, at the application suite, we will find interesting applications coming out at mobile phones and edge devices, which will be able to either conjure up different sets of blockchains and talk to both of them at the same time, or be able to transfer and commit cryptocurrency-based exchange.
And Kesam, just to bring you on that one, from what you said, it sounds like it's not the main focus of Aion, but what's your thoughts on moving down to the mobile layer, or is that something that you're kind of parking?
Yeah, well, I absolutely love it. Like when you think about, take Bitcoin, obviously the oldest and largest network out there. When you see how the whole premise of why it makes sense is around decentralization, but then just because of the economies of scale, in scope to an extent, you see re-centralization, right? So you have distinct, gigantic mining pools, and not that I'm saying that it's likely, but let's say that enough governments around the world decide that they had enough with this Bitcoin nonsense and try to shut it down. The way that it will be very, very hard to do, but you have targets. You have gigantic pools that you could actively go and target. So when you talk about every phone, every edge device is a node itself in the context of blockchain, that really excites me because that is truly unstoppable. That will be impossible to shut down.
And by that definition of mobile phones, aside from Moore's law and quantum compute and all of that, we believe that the mobile phone at the edge doesn't need to be a high-end smartphone. That the new models of consensus, like the ones you've just discussed, which are quite exciting, means that I don't have to compete for very valuable portable energy at the edge to be able to conduct my business. And also, consequently, by the limitations of the device, whether I use a digital ID to manage the device's ability to authenticate and be used on that blockchain, means that I can quantify and contextualize and almost push out the big mining pools and make it truly decentralized.
Absolutely. And then the question you'd ask is, so what? So you have this truly gigantic, truly decentralized blockchain. What could you do with it, right? What kind of enterprises want to interact with it? What kind of services could they offer to the users of that blockchain? All of those questions Those are interoperability questions. I don't think that a bank ever jumps natively on a chain like that, but I absolutely see even today's consortium networks that are interconnecting banks on various use cases, trying to interact with that blockchain to be able to offer, every kind of service that you could imagine coming from a financial institution to the largest, most decentralized blockchain in the world, essentially.
So I think what really excites us about a position like this is when you merge these sorts of technologies with the upcoming 5G, where you've got user to user or vehicle to vehicle technologies. And then all of a sudden, I have the ability to share media across a plane where I can almost decentralize technologies like Netflix. So I don't have to go to a central place to get the content. I don't have to be the only consumer of my consumable megabytes or video or data. I can actually distribute, share, gift, and recirculate them in the most efficient way.
So let's follow on that thought with the IoT space. So picking on what you said there, Yakin, and something previously about not needing a smart device to be part of this. Obviously now everything's getting more connected. You can have a SIM card obviously in your smart meter. You're going to have it in your radiator. You're going to have it in everything in your house. Does that mean each of those could therefore act as nodes? And again, on the IPFS system, also as a storage content to share all of that. And that comes down to the interoperability of not just having the hardware on the phone, but you need to install it on every device as well. From that side, so how do you see this fitting into the IoT space?
So I think that the ability for a mobile-orientated interoperability on the digital landscape may not only be solved by blockchain. I think blockchain and the replication of its nodes is valuable where it makes sense. When you get down to dumb devices or really small edge devices that may or may not be connected permanently, I think that's where we've got a challenge of understanding how the offline management of digital ID and verification will be. I mean, one of the biggest challenges of IoT that I think technologies such as blockchain and robotic process automation and AI can start to help is the growing concerns of IoT security. And innately, the immutability of these digital instruments will effectively make those end-to-end use cases not just richer, but smarter and safer to interact with.
Okay, I think that's almost got time for there. Just a final one for Kesson, for our UK market. What's Aion's view of releasing anything in the UK? Anything coming over to the UK just to tease our listeners?
So we're big fans of the UK. We think it's an absolute global focal point for, crypto applications, blockchains, and enterprise. We are really excited. I can't emphasize how much by being partners with Fifth9. We think that the fact that you now have really large, global brands that are buying into this technology, that are buying solutions developed natively by our partners at Fifth9 based on our architecture, we couldn't be more thrilled about this. What's to come? That's probably a Yakin question more than I don't know how much I'm allowed to even disclose.
I think there's going to be very, very interesting things in the next few months, Phil, and we will present them as we roll out these podcasts.
Fabulous. In that case, Kesson, Yakin, thank you kindly as ever, and hopefully to have you on a podcast in the future. Thank you very much.
This podcast has been brought to you by Fifth9 Digital. You can find us online at www.fifth-9.com.